Ready to make a real impact every day? Join the Active Day Home Care team and help clients maintain their independence in the comfort of their own homes. Make a difference in someone's life as you provide essential daily assistance and protect their health and happiness. Earn up to $20 an hour and enjoy additional perks like optional daily pay, 401k, paid time off, ongoing educational training, and more. Join a team that values care, compassion, and your professional growth. Visit activeday.com to apply.
Stop right there. Yeah, you. If you like all things entertainment, current events, or Hollywood, then look no further. Creator to Creators, hosted by director Meosha of Horror Noir, interviews filmmakers and creatives from around the world. Join in on the fun, guest celebrities, and informative information to have as a creator. Hit subscribe and stay connected to Creator to Creators.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Creators to Creators today. Today, we have a special guest,
Michelle McLeod.
Jeri Dilno.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having us today.
Yeah, this is kind of exciting.
Definitely. I mean, I always like to start with every guest, like from the beginning, kind of like your childhood and kind of how was that growing up and like going into the direction that you are now with like as being an activist?
Well, it wasn't much of my growing up that caused me to be an activist. My family was not even very political.
Interesting.
It wasn't until later in life that I became more activist oriented because of the situations that I found myself in.
I see.
Yes, the same here. That was Jeri, and this is Michelle. You know who's who.
Yes. Yeah.
The same here. Jeri and I have a similar story when it comes to the military, and both of us were discharged way before Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Especially Jeri. Jeri is 85, so she has a long history of activism, and I'm 56, so long, but not as long. So the story is that we were both discharged from the military, and that made us both wake up to the fact that our rights were not given to us outside the military and inside the military. And I know for myself, that's when I said, you shouldn't have done that when they discharged me. And that just put me on that path.
Right.
Same for you, Jeri?
Well, no, it took me a little bit longer to come out politically because right after I got discharged, I was so depressed. I was discharged 3 days before my normal date of separation.
Wow.
I was one of the targets of a investigation looking for homosexuals in the service.
Wow.
And I only had 3 more days for my discharge would be effective. And I worked overtime to make sure that I had an undesirable.
What made you want to get into the military first and foremost?
Well, I
like,
come from a military family. My father is a 30-year Navy veteran.
Oh, wow.
So I grew up with the military protocol. In fact, I always like to say I had my first standby inspection when I was 11 years old.
Wow.
My father was really wedded to his Navy job.
Gotcha. So it was a very militant growing up childhood. That's pretty interesting.
Yes.
It was your mom, was she, I guess, the nicer, very pleasant?
Well, my mother was sort of a shy person, and my father basically ran things when he was home. I mean, he was gone a lot.
Yeah.
But my mother was somewhat of a passive person.
I see. So you're in the military, and what was the branch? Was it Army? I
was in the Air Force.
Air Force.
I had intended to join the Navy to follow in my father's footsteps. But when I went down to the recruiting office, the Navy recruiters were out to lunch. So I went down the hallway just waiting for them, and I found the Air Force recruiters. And I just went in to talk to them. And then the next thing I knew, I was in the Air Force.
Wow. How
And
long were you in it? How long you were in the
well, I signed up initially for the basic 3-year enlistment. My
mhm.
plan was to uh, take the test for officers candidate school and let the Air Force pay for the rest of my college education. I had a couple of years of college, and then become an officer and probably make it a career.
Wow.
But that didn't happen.
Yeah. So you get kicked out because you're part of this big investigation. How what I'm sure it was devastating. Like, how did you feel, and like what happened next after that? Like, what was the next step after being kicked out? And I mean, what did you do? Where'd you go?
Oh, I came back home, and I didn't talk very much about my military career, and then the fact was that I was only 3 days short of my date of separation when they kicked me out. So I didn't have a lot of unexplained military time,
Mhm.
and I was very fortunate. I was stationed in Omaha, Nebraska at the time, and I was very fortunate to find a job almost right away because of the training that I'd had in the Air Force, and because I didn't have a big gap in my enlistment like a lot of people who get discharged undesirably. Uh, it happens in their first or second year, and they have a gap in their military records. I was only 3 days short of having my full enlistment, so
Wow.
I could use my Air Force training to get employed.
Okay. Okay. So you get employed. That's great that you got another job right away. And
Uh-huh.
what did that job entitle? What was that job exactly?
Well, when I was in the service, I was what they call a cartographic engraver, which meant I made maps,
Oh, interesting.
which was related, which was related to civil engineering. And as it turned out, there was a civil engineer in Omaha who had just purchased some equipment from the Air Force, but nobody in his office knew how to operate it. But I did.
Mm,
So I got the job without much difficulty, and um, I didn't have to worry about him checking my Air Force records since I had only a 3-day gap. A lot of people who've been in this experience of being kicked out have anywhere from a year to 2 years gap in their military records, and I only had 3 days to make up.
wow. Yeah.
And so with the experience that I'd gotten in the Air Force, I got a job in a civil engineering office, and pretty much worked in civil engineering for the next 20 some years.
Wow. So, okay, 20 years go by and you're doing that. I mean, I'm just curious. So were you doing like activism work? How did you get into that field? How did you kind of start? And
Well, I didn't really do anything activist until I came back to San Diego after about 5 years in Omaha. I mean, there was too much snow for me. So I'm trying to remember how I actually got into activism, because I was a basketball and softball player, and I
Nice.
met a woman who was from Philadelphia, and we ended up in a relationship. So I moved to Philadelphia,
Nice.
um, and it was while I was there that that was in the early '70s, and I came across activists, and in particular Barbara Giddings, who is well known as an activist in Philadelphia and nationally, and that started my role in being an activist. It was 1972, I believe, and they were planning to have a gay march in Philadelphia, which no one had done before, and
Hmm.
um, so a group of us was just novices. We planned the first gay and lesbian march in Philadelphia, and that's kind of where I got started with my activism.
Wow. That's incredible.
And that was in the '72, I believe.
Wow. Nice.
it's like only
Well, we were surprised how many people showed up for that march, but there was
Wow.
just a handful of us putting it together, and none of us really knew that much about it. but we managed to pull it off.
Right, right. No, that's awesome. That's incredible. So you just kind of start. I love that. Just going for it and just, you know what? Let's do it. I love that attitude. Um,
And then after about 5 years in Philadelphia, I returned to San Diego, and that was in, I think, 1975. I came back to San Diego, and my then partner came with me. And when we got here, the Gay and Lesbian Center, which had been open, I think, about 3 years at that point, they were starting to plan a gay pride march in San Diego, but nobody knew how to do it. And
mm.
and we showed up, and they all of a sudden we were the experts in parade planning. So in 1975, San Diego had its first official pride march, and
1975. That's amazing.
yeah, and at the time, I was hired as the executive director of the Gay Center, which had just opened I think they just opened in '72. So um, that was the real beginning of my gay activism, was the early '70s.
Were there any like kind of pushback in between, like you know what I'm saying? Like, you know, like you see certain events being put together, like especially, you know, marching for, you know, I wonder if there's ever like pushback from higher ups, people like, oh, you know, this is not going to happen, or how do you like jump through the hoops to get certain things going, to get around those things?
Well, we actually didn't have much difficulty getting our
That's
permit,
great. Wow.
except that they didn't know where to put us. The woman who was and my partner at the time, she was given the task of going down to the police station here in San Diego to
Mhm.
get a permit for the march. And in Philadelphia, they had a civil disobedience unit, and they knew how to do all this. But here in San Diego, sleepy little Navy town, they had no idea how to do it, and they didn't have a process for doing a permit. So we were the first ones to really, I guess, get a permit here in San Diego for
Wow.
a political march and a short rally afterwards.
Wow. That's incredible that you started that, you know, that's incredible. Do you feel like and not to just, you know, get off topic, but do you feel like now, you know, with, you know, how do you feel like that everything has changed as far as like um LGBTQ T plus community? Do you think that it's the movement is
Yeah,
moving in a good direction now?
well, in that early time, that was 1975, and I had to keep my work life and well, not so much then because I was director of the center, but later on, as I began to go back to work in the civil engineering field, I had to keep my work life and my political life separate.
Mm.
But a couple things changed that. One was I was selected as a delegate to the International Women's Conference in Houston, which I don't remember, was there mid '70s. And I was working for a civil engineering office at the time. And civil engineering offices tend to be politically very to the right rather than to the left,
Mm.
more conservative.
Right.
So I told them, I was going to the International Women's Conference, but I didn't tell them I was going as an open lesbian, but the newspaper wanted to do a report on a story on those of us from San Diego who were going to the conference, and they identified me as an open lesbian delegate. So I was a little nervous, but my employers at the time didn't seem to mind that much. They didn't even really take
Supportive.
notice. In fact, when I came back from the conference, one of my coworkers had saved all of the clippings from the newspaper
Oh, wow.
and gave them to me. So, you went in those times in the '70s. You always worried about getting fired simply for being gay.
Right.
But I was fortunate that the people I worked for at that time were pretty liberal.
Wow, that's incredible. I mean, I'm curious, Mickey, and you can chime in too. I'm I'm sure at that time, like you said, it's being like you have to worry about like it's totally different time than we're living now. Did you have that kind of in like with you, Mickey? Did you feel like was it easy to kind of get back into civilization after getting out of the army, or was it just a little bit more difficult for you? And how did you kind of like how did you guys to like meet some way in like life? How did your connection happen?
Well, the first part that you were speaking about, I came out at 18, actually before I went in the Navy, and so it wasn't hard for them to find out when they started investigating that I was a lesbian. They were able to go back and say, "Oh,
Right.
this person knew, this person knew." So I had to kind of just squelch it when I went in the service. And it's funny because Jeri and I have the opposite story. I wanted to go in the Air Force, and I didn't take algebra. Now you have to take algebra now, but I didn't have to as a kid, and so I missed the math part by like 5 points on the ASVAB.
Mm-hmm.
I scored very high for the Navy, but just short of what the Air Force wanted because I didn't have algebra. So I wound up going into the Navy's office. They were not out to lunch. I wish they were, but they were not. So I did wind up going in the Navy. So we had the opposite story. Anyway, at that time, yes, I agree with Jeri that there was a lot of pressure. And I grew up in Virginia and New Jersey, like off and on in Jersey, but mainly Virginia as a kid anyway. As you know, in the background, that state was very, very conservative. Northern Virginia is much more liberal now, and I was just outside of DC 45 minutes. So it was not liberal then. And there was a lot of faith-based places that would say, no, we don't want anything to do with you because you're a lesbian. But the good part was I was not putting that genie back in the bottle.
Right.
Because I felt really strongly about it. This was 1984, and I had just graduated high school. So I literally share my story as having a diploma and a suitcase, you know, because I was turned away from a lot of places, and I wound up being homeless and that kind of thing. And I had been in foster care, and you know all that from the episode that you and I did together. But to catch up, I was the person that said you shouldn't have done that to the Navy because, again, like Jeri's story, I was part of a witch hunt. I had been investigated, followed off the base, and somebody, I guess, had turned themselves in, and then they just took that person and they did that 6 steps to Kevin Bacon thing where they just, attach everyone together, right?
Right.
Connect everyone. So we know that part of my history. And yes, there were times where you had to keep everything separate. And you didn't want to say that you were with someone or for how long. And I got tired of that very quickly. So I moved to Jersey permanently, like for 13 years at 23 years old. And I was already telling every single person, no, I'm gay. No, I'm gay. I'm gay.
Right.
I'm gay.
Yeah.
Men were always coming on to me. They wanted to date. And no, I'm gay. I was really adamant about putting that out there.
Right.
But they tried. Jersey was not as bad as Virginia, but they did try to put you like in that position of not sharing
Right.
or sharing very little.
I'm sorry?
Sharing very little.
Yeah.
Especially if you wanted to go somewhere professionally. Maybe you shouldn't say that. Maybe you should wear a dress. I don't wear dresses. I haven't worn a dress since 1987.
Right.
I remember when that was.
Right.
So does that kind of catch you up? And then you were asking about Jeri and I and when we met each other.
Yeah. How did you two meet? Like I'm curious how that works.
Well, Jeri, I was working at the community, at the center that she was talking about, that she was an executive director of.
Oh,
San
nice.
Diego, but I was working there as a senior case manager.
Several years later.
Several years later, right? More recently. And Jeri and I met through those circles, especially with the LGBT seniors.
Mhm.
And so we connected and we became friends after that. I'm not at that position anymore. We kept our friendship going from there.
That's
And
beautiful.
yeah, she's a mentor to me, and she still laughs about that. I don't get it. I don't know why they say that, but
I can't believe I'm a mentor to anyone.
oh, come on. And since we have these similar backgrounds of in the political realm, as you know, I shared with you on the episode you and I did about being in DC,
Yeah.
working on equality rights. And so her and I have that as well.
Well, yeah, the thing that where I started to become an activist was through the Democratic Party. When I was shortly after I was executive director of the center, and then I went back to work in civil engineering offices, and I joined what was then the fledgling LGBT Democratic Club here in San Diego, and began to learn a lot about politics. I'd always been interested in politics, but never been active. And this was a very active group. They were responsible for several people getting elected. At one point, we were the most powerful Democratic club in the county.
Wow.
And I was president of the club at some point down the line. We had some statewide issues here. The John Briggs initiative that wanted to fire all lesbian and gay teachers.
Wow.
And so I became very politically involved in the Democratic Party and actually became a delegate to 3 different national conventions. So my political experience and knowledge, it was all connected to first gay rights, and now it's broader than that. And
Wow.
I became a kind of a political junkie, I guess you'd say.
No, that's amazing. That's incredible. How do you feel things are changing as far as like, it's rights and stuff now? I mean, you look around now, with this new generation coming up, is it much different than it was,
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I really came out in the late 50s when I was when I first started college, out of high school. I was about 19, and it was so you just had to hide it completely. You couldn't talk about it. The woman I was involved with was an older lesbian, older person, and she knew some of the LGBT community, mostly lesbian community around the college, but she wouldn't let me participate, and she kept us separate. And so I wasn't really aware. I mean, at 19, I thought that we were like the only lesbian couple in the world in San Diego. And so I think that started me off in kind of a negative way about the community, finding out much later that there was indeed a full community to be experienced.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
I would say the same thing, piggybacking on that I do remember thinking, where are my people? And I didn't know where they were till I joined the Navy. So I was in a group home, and some of the girls were going through that stage, if you know what I'm saying. But they weren't, there was only probably like 3 to 5 of us that were really lesbians. So I've never really had the role models. Right. There was only like soap that had Billy Crystal in the 70s, and that was a joke. Everything was a joke, right? The way they were looking at lesbian and gay people. Forget about transgender. They weren't even looking at that at all. That was really horrible.
But at least you could say the word lesbian in public. We couldn't even do that.
Oh.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was really, it was a hard time. It was very hard to come into your own, to be comfortable in your own skin. So even though in my case I was adamant about like I'm going to say this because Harvey
Mhm.
Milk said, and when I was 11, when I realized I was gay, and that's when Harvey Milk had said, "Come out of the closet." Now, of
Mm.
course, I didn't understand it entirely yet, but later on, when it all kicked in, I was like, "That's right, he said to do that." Um, and that's why I was so adamant about it.
Yeah,
Even when I was getting discharged, I said, "What are you asking me if I'm gay? Like, just say it already."
so yeah, my story is a little bit different because even after I got kicked out of the service, as I said, I was only 3 days short of completing my enlistment, so I didn't have a lot of um, time to explain. A lot of people who got discharged in those early days um, had a gap. I mean, discharge is usually 3 to 4 years, and I mean, enlistment is usually 3 to 4 years, and when you get discharged after a year or sometimes even 6 months, you have all this time to explain what happened to you.
For
But
sure.
I was politically in the closet
Right, right.
until I returned to San Diego.
Well, like I'm curious, when I hear the word activist and, what were kind of some goals that you wanted or certain things that you wanted to change as an activist?
Well, at the time I came out as an activist, which was, I say, 1972, shortly after the Stonewall riots, um, there were a lot of things that we wanted to change. I was worked mostly in the political arena trying to get uh, candidates who were friendly to the LGBT community, and then as we moved along politically, then of course getting openly gay people elected. I was privileged to work. I was in Philadelphia, and we went up to Boston and did letter writing for Elaine Noble, whose campaign changed the perception of whether an LGBT person could successfully run for office.
Oh,
And
wow.
so I had always been interested in politics, so it was really easy for me to transfer my energy into LGBT politics, and that's when I
Love
got
it.
involved with the local San Diego Democratic Club, which was an LGBT club, and eventually became, at one point, served 2 terms as their president, and
Wow.
and that led to me being involved in the Democratic Party in San Diego, which was much more friendly to the LGBT community than the Republicans, and
Right.
and I and I was actually active in the Democratic Party in San Diego as a delegate and at conventions and such. So it's like my LGBT activism led me to political activism.
Right. Wow.
Yes, and I would say the same thing for myself. I was really involved also in the AIDS epidemic, and I'm sure Jerry was as well. That was probably the first big one for me in the 80s, where it was like, at that time, it was, we're not even getting medicine to these people.
Mm.
They're not even seeing them. At that time, we weren't even allowed to visit our partners or anyone that weren't family. So we'd have
Wow.
to lie and say we were sisters or we were cousins or whatever, just to get in the hospital room or take them into whatever it was
Yeah.
medically. That was a big thing. AIDS was a big thing, HIV, all of that. That was one of the first things I remember working on out of New York City. And then later on, it started going into, for myself anyway, then it started going into what Jerry was doing, which was getting more and more legislators on board.
Yeah.
And then it became obviously into the 2000s after Massachusetts passed marriage in 2004. Then it became, oh yeah, now I'm living in Connecticut. So now I'm like, okay, well, now we're going to, I was helping Ned Lamont, who's the governor now, but then he was running for, what was he running for then? He was out of Norwalk. I know I was working on his campaign.
Hmm.
So basically the same thing she's saying, where it was like, we're just trying to get the right people in the right positions.
Absolutely.
Okay.
For to
And
for things to change. Absolutely.
yes.
Well, you
And
guys, you two
yes.
are you did a great job. And I think, and I think you're still doing the job. It's like an ongoing thing. And I think the new generation now coming up is they're really
it's
pushing it. It's amazing.
it's not well, I don't know exactly how to phrase it, but the lesbian experience during the AIDS crisis, we just as in society, women were sort of second best, and we
Right.
didn't have many of the leadership positions. But during the AIDS epidemic, we started to take a stronger role in the community.
Hmm.
And here in San Diego, we had what we called the Blood Sisters Drive,
Hmm.
because the gay men were not allowed to give blood. So we organized a Blood Sisters blood drive, and women from all over the county came, and the blood bank was just did not know what to do with all this horde of lesbians that showed up, wanted to give blood, but but there was a lot of support.
That's great.
Prior to that time, the communities, the gay men and lesbians, were somewhat separate. We had separate bars and
Right.
separate organizations, but that epidemic created a more unified experience because the women stepped forward, and the men were pretty amazed by that.
Yeah.
It really built, it was a negative thing, but it really built a community.
Absolutely. This is a really good conversation, by the way. My last question, I like to ask every guest that come on the show, like, what advice would you give to someone that or maybe don't have the support system, or supportive family? What does that look like?
Well, I think the advice to give now is different than the advice I would have given in the 70s.
Hmm.
But a person coming out now, there are places where you can get support, and they're not that difficult to find. And I would just encourage people to look for their community, to look for their LGBT organizations, because there's a lot of people out there that are willing to help you with the coming out process, which we didn't have.
Right.
And in fact, one of the things that made me an activist was when I was in Philadelphia, was meeting Barbara Giddings, who was an icon to political LGBT issues, and she used to travel. This was in the 60s. She would travel the country and speak at colleges and on radio stations, and she was just adamant about coming out. And then when she would come back, she would get letters from people saying, "I heard you on the radio, and I'm gay, and I live in the middle of Iowa."
Right.
And so she gave me the task of answering these letters, which was quite eye-opening to me, because a lot of people, especially in the conservative middle part of the country, I mean, I was a native Californian. I'd been living in Philadelphia, New York. I mean, it was much more politically aware. But in some of the Kentucky, for instance, these people didn't know what to do. They just realized they were gay, and they thought they were the only ones in the world.
Right.
So that experience of answering her mail and reading letters of people who were just not so much in the closet, but just had no idea what the resources were, was a really good experience for me.
That's amazing. I love that. And Mickey, do you have any
Yeah.
it's like advice?
Okay. Well, I definitely agree with what Jeri's saying. The big one is to find organizations that are local to you, so that you can join groups. Actually, you got Meetup as well. I'm finding that there's all kinds of groups to go to on Meetup, right? That's the new thing now for this generation, to go and meet their people, if you will,
Right.
and feel comfortable. And if you're a little shy, that's okay. People usually will embrace you into conversation, and I think that's a big part of it. Also, if you are young, depending on what age we're talking, you got GSAs in high school, and you have that in college as well, to find your LGBT groups, and those are good places. And if you have to just research through Google. I mean, things will come up. Just know that when you come in that people have been there. That's the main thing.
Right.
Everyone has been there. They got their story.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone has a story when it comes to being LGBT. They really do. When and where they transitioned, when did they come out of the closet? When did they tell their family? When did they tell themselves? When did they accept it?
Right.
When did they tell their church? When did they, everyone has these stories. So you're going to be okay. You're not alone.
Absolutely.
I would say it's a lot easier now than it was in the 50s.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yes.
So there's that.
And
No.
also I want to, yes, I just want to say real quick, Meosha, about 988.
Yeah.
They turned the National Suicide Hotline into 988. So if there's anyone out there who is feeling very lonely and want to do something like this, we don't want that to happen. So now they have 988, and you could just call that number if you're feeling like you know.
And also now like I would have never dreamt this, but they have openly LGBT groups in high school.
Yes, the GSA, the
GSAs, and so there's a lot more availability of support, and it just has made us a much stronger community. Young people are coming out with a sense of who they are, and that it's not a negative thing.
Right.
I mean, it still happens from time to, in families, but by and large, it's a lot more accepting to come out in today's world as to come out in 1954.
Right. I just saw like J-Lo, Jennifer Lopez, and Ben Affleck. Both of their daughters, Jennifer Lopez's daughter, she identified as they and them.
Right.
And the other daughter of Ben Affleck, Serafina, had these Dr. Martin shoes that had pride flags. I was like, look at that. What? Special edition of Pride.
Love it.
Pride Dr. Martens. They were holding hands walking the street. Now, I'm not saying they're together. Please don't misinterpret.
The tablets,
what I'm saying
they're writing.
Yeah, right. Their generation is saying, who cares?
Right.
And we're just amazed by that, right? Aren't you, Jeri?
Oh, I'm really amazed by it. I mean, when I first came out at the age of 18 or 19, I was with an older woman in her 20s who managed to convince me that we were the only ones in San Diego.
But that's the wonderful thing is that thank you for your work, and thank you both for your work and just the everything that you're doing. And thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. What a great conversation.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yes,
for sure. And thank you all for listening. And always remember to live, love, laugh.